Hello.
And we're back with Warren Kinsella, as we always are on a Fridays. Regardless of when you're listening to this podcast, it is being recorded on a Friday, January 27th. Hang on, I've got to try that again. My eyes failed me. It's January 26th. Can I just do it again?
Yep.
I'll just do it again. In
Yep.
3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Charles Adler Show. We are recording this podcast on Friday, January 26th, 3 days ahead of my mom's 90th birthday. Warren Kinsella, we can begin with you wishing my mom a happy birthday, and then we can move on to the most important story of the week, perhaps the most important story of the season.
Happy birthday, Mrs. Adler. Happy birthday, Mrs. Adler. Happy birthday, happy birthday. I know your son, and he's a pretty good guy.
All right. That may not mean as much to you as it will to her. Thank you so much, Warren Kinsella. All right. So now that we've gotten the personal stuff out of the way, let's get into something that is absolutely critical. Warren Kinsella is a Renaissance man. There are so many things that he's accomplished: author, painter, war room guy, public relations expert, the CEO of the Daisy Group. But right now, he's going to be wearing the lawyer's hat, looking at the latest judgment coming down from the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. Warren, I think you've looked through most of what they've delivered. What are you seeing?
I see Israel winning, and I'm pretty happy about it. And I think anybody who supports Israel and decency and civilization is happy about it, because we didn't expect it. You know, this is the court, the high court of the United Nations. The United Nations General Assembly ruled 14 times against Israel just last year. It's ruled against Israel many, many other times and voted against it and condemned it and so on. And contrary, I think, to most people's expectations, mine included, South Africa's stunt to have Israel found guilty of genocide and ordered to stop its necessary military action against Hamas. They didn't find that. The 15-member panel ruled that there was, in fact, a slaughter of Jews in Israel on October 7th. There was rape. There are hostages who should be released immediately. And they said, you know, we may rule on the issue of genocide at a later date. But they basically said to Israel, conduct yourself with some care and some caution. But they declined to find that Israel was committing genocide. And that is a very good thing indeed.
So you say you were surprised, and it's not that I want to argue with you, but I always see my job as drilling down into the legal mind of Kinsella in behalf of those who are listening to us and watching. Are you suggesting that the International Court of Justice is generally casual about genocide?
No, I'm suggesting that the International Court of Justice is unfair to Israel, and it's got 15 members representing a bunch of different countries. Unfortunately, some of those countries are run by despots, and they're not democracies by any standard. And I don't think anybody expected this. Now, you may say, okay, well then why did Israel bother to participate in the litigation that was brought by South Africa 2 weeks ago? Well, because the eyes of the world are on Gaza. The eyes of the world are on what's taking place in Gaza at the present time. And while it didn't have material legal value in the way that court decisions do elsewhere in the world, it certainly had an importance symbolically would the world court, because that's what this is, say that Israel was committing genocide. And this morning, historically, surprisingly, it did not rule that. It did not say that Israel was committing genocide. It declined to do that. And that was a big surprise.
All right. Well, okay. I'll just say, not because I'm a lawyer, but because I follow this stuff assiduously and have for my entire life. I did not expect them to rule in favor of South Africa, because I think they take the word genocide very seriously if it comes to a whole lot of other issues around whether or not Israel is doing enough to provide, make sure that the people in Gaza have humanitarian relief and many other things. I think the ICJ would rule against Israel, but I think genocide is a bridge too far. When is the last time the ICJ? Do you know, Warren? When is the last time they accused any country of genocide?
Well, the most celebrated and important, and there have been some important decisions made by these international bodies, particularly what took place in Rwanda, particularly what took place in Bosnia in the 90s and the slaughter of Muslims by the Serbs. So they have dealt with this issue before, but it's so important, Charles, that this issue be dealt with delicately. People are throwing around the word genocide these days like it's confetti and accusing Israel of it. Genocide is the most serious crime there is. It is murder on a mass scale motivated by hatred. There's no more serious crime with which you can charge an individual or a group or a country. Like, there's nothing above that. That's the most serious allegation there is. And that's why so many of us were appalled by South Africa, the birthplace of Nelson Mandela, participating, actually leading this effort to accuse Israel of genocide. Well, they miscalculated. They made a big mistake, and so did their patrons, which includes Russia. And they've received funding from Hamas in the past because, as we all know, Hamas is swimming in it. They lost. And I woke up to this ruling and I just couldn't believe it. Now, Judge Donahue, who is an American, who is the president of the court, said this morning that Gaza has become a place of death and despair. And that's one thing that both sides can agree upon. But, Israel would say, and I would say, well, the reason why it's become a place of death and despair is because of Hamas. Hamas and Russia and China might say it's because of Israel. Well, the International Court of Justice did not agree with that. They said that, Charles, that Israel needs to ensure that it's adhering to the Geneva Convention. It needs to make sure that it is prosecuting this war with care and attention to humanitarian issues, needs to let in aid. It's been doing that. But it did not find that Israel has committed genocide. And this one is like, knock me over with a feather. Did not expect it.
Okay, well, the other reason I didn't expect them to rule genocide, because some of the evidence that South Africa was presenting doesn't cut it. Doesn't cut the mustard as far as evidence is concerned. And when I say that, I'm referring specifically to statements made by the most radical members of the Netanyahu government. Yes, they are people that I think you and I would both agree, and I think most fair-minded Canadians would agree, do not belong in any cabinet. And I think Joe Biden has said that to Netanyahu face to face, that these guys don't belong in the cabinet of any democracy. Of course, it's Netanyahu's decision to keep them there. But it's their vulgar and venal, ugly, yes, and I'll say it, genocidal statements that got Israel into trouble, I think, with the South Africans.
Absolutely. And some of those statements by those extremists were read into the record today. And there's no question those members of Netanyahu's cabinet and Netanyahu himself, in my opinion, are extremists, and they have no interest in peace. They're interested in war because they see that as furthering, their political objectives, their political careers, really. But like, at the end of the day, the court ruled that there was no genocide taking place. They said that they're not required to ascertain whether there've been any violations of the Geneva Convention at this time. I'm not sure that's the case. They said that it could happen at a later stage of the process. But the way the ICJ works, Charles, like, we could be talking months from now, years from now, before they rule ultimately on some of these other questions. But for the interim ruling, the ruling that took place today, this Friday, this morning, they ruled in favor of Israel. And that is a very big deal indeed.
So let's go to a different country and the idea of national security being subservient to politics. And I'm speaking specifically about Capitol Hill conservatives, Capitol Hill Republicans. And by the way, the Wall Street Journal, the organ of the conservative movement in the United States, has come out. I've never seen this before, and I've been reading the Wall Street Journal since I was 16 years old, sneaking into university libraries. The Wall Street Journal editorial board has actually decided that Joe Biden's Democrats have the correct position on the border, and the Republicans do not. Mitch McConnell and his Republicans deciding they will do nothing to fix the border security issue. I'm talking about the southern border, of course, not the border with Canada, but the southern border, which is leaking like a sieve. That they will do nothing to help the southern border situation, because if they help Joe Biden and the Democrats and they help their countrymen with that border situation, it may not be in the favor of Donald Trump, who will be using the border situation from now until November. So the Republicans putting politics over national security. Warren Kinsella, your take.
Not all of them, however. Senate Republicans, who tend to be more mature than the maniacs that represent the GOP in the House of Representatives, as you know. Some of them are privately seething, the New York Times has reported this morning, because Trump, fresh from his victories in Iowa and New Hampshire, went and blew up the deal that existed over the border. Because he is the agent of chaos, as we've talked about before. That's what he favors. He doesn't favor any coherent policy. He favors dictators and strongmen and chaos. And so whatever deal was there was blown up by him and the winged monkeys who make up his caucus. But, as with abortion, Charles, I think the GOP is going to rue the day that they let important policy decisions be made by Trump and these idiots who surround him. If you look at what happened in the off-year midterms, really, that took place in November, and, the year before that, the policy decisions like abortion are tremendously hurting the Republican Party. It almost doesn't matter who leads the Democrats. All they have to do these days is stand up and say, we favor reproductive rights for women, and we are against election denialism. We believe in democracy, and they win. Like in Kansas, like the reddest of the red states, they constitutionalize abortion rights. So the GOP is making a huge mistake. And I say this full disclosure, somebody's worked for Biden and worked for Hillary, by following Donald Trump down the path, because they're following him down the path to defeat again. We needed to have some kind of a border deal. It is reasonable to have some kind of reasonable controls over a nation's borders. And it was critically important because the military support for Ukraine was being held up by it as well. In Ukraine, they're literally running out of bullets on the front line. We needed to have some kind of an agreement about moving forward in the United States. And once again, Trump has blown it up. He is the chaos agent.
So Tucker Carlson is in Calgary and Edmonton this week. And Danielle Smith is the Premier of Alberta, is on the stage with him. It's a crowd that absolutely loves Tucker Carlson, and it's a crowd that loves Danielle Smith. And if you just look at the optics of how the crowd responded to Tucker Carlson and Smith, it looks like a successful night both in Calgary and Edmonton. But I want to look beyond, tickets and ticket sales. Although many tickets were given away free, they couldn't fill the arenas without a lot of freebies, papering the house, as it were. But putting that aside, Tucker Carlson is perhaps Vladimir Putin's best friend in the United States. They run Tucker Carlson commentaries regularly on all of Putin's propaganda networks. Tucker Carlson puts out the word that Ukraine is the bad guy and Vladimir Putin is the good guy, even to the extent of saying that Putin is defending Christians, whereas Ukraine isn't. And I'm not going to get into all of the other ridiculous propaganda. What does it look like to you? You're a native Calgarian. What does it look like to you to have the Premier of Alberta dancing with the devil, as it were, Tucker Carlson?
It's a disgrace. It's disgusting. And it makes me ashamed as an Albertan. And she echoed some of the stuff that this bastard has said about Russia, because she initially suggested that Vladimir Putin should be allowed to do whatever he wants in Ukraine. And Alberta has one of the largest Ukrainian diasporas in the world, so she had to execute a quick reversal on that one. But like, leaving that issue aside, Tucker Carlson, Charles, is a white supremacist. Like, this is a guy who said that immigrants make the United States poorer and dirtier and more divided. This is a guy who has said that there is a white replacement theory, which is that immigrants are being let in and it's eugenics against white people, and white people are being replaced by immigrants. This is a guy who has said that white men created civilization, and on and on and on. He is a white supremacist. He is a Klansman in a suit and a tie. And Danielle Smith may not care now that she posed for a ridiculous selfie with this bastard, but she is going to regret it in the future, because every further outrageous statement that Tucker Carlson makes, she is going to be forced to wear, because that's the way politics works. So shame on her for doing that, but I think she's going to pay a heavy price for it.
Danielle Smith was standing there smiling in both Calgary and Edmonton while Tucker Carlson was mocking Justin Trudeau, not in the way that most people mock him, at least not most people publicly. And you're one of the people who've done your share of mocking of the Prime Minister. But he was getting into the business of calling Justin Trudeau a cross-dresser. And I'm loath to just throw around the word homophobia casually. I don't. But this was 100% hate-filled, homophobic messaging from Tucker Carlson, and Danielle Smith was just sitting there smiling. And I hate to put it this way, because as a human being, I have respect for her and I know her. But on this podcast or anything else I do publicly, whether it's a column or this, I've got to say what I mean and mean what I say. She came across as simply a childish right-wing groupie, while Tucker Carlson was laying down that kind of sickening lumber.
Well, you're a nicer person than me, because I have no respect for her whatsoever, and I never have. I think she's an idiot, and this was yet more evidence of that. And it's like Tucker Carlson is one to talk about homophobia, because I think you and I are both aware of some of the stories that circulated about this guy for many years. So he doth protest too much. Let's just put it that way. But so what? If you're indulging in that kind of offensive bullshit, that doesn't say anything about your target. It's the war room rule. And I'd say to all the young charges that work for me in war rooms, when our rule in any war room that I ran is we focus critically on the public record of our opponents, votes and quotes, and how they use banknotes. That's what I would say to them. But we are not ever to talk about somebody's personal life or their family, because that just rebounds on the accuser. That just rebounds on the one who's making those statements. And it makes Tucker Carlson look like a scumbag, and it places her directly in the blast radius. And, why she was there is beyond me. She's won. She's got a majority, barely. And she's not running again. She didn't need to be there. By being there, she tells us everything that we need to know about what Danielle Smith is really like. And it's not very good.
Warren Kinsella, scientists are now getting serious about play. Scientists in this country are now talking about how it really would be useful for children to spend more time outdoors. Now, this is all about curbing helicopter parenting. And I'm old enough to remember being a child before the helicopter. You and I are both about the same age. I'm exaggerating only a little bit. But you're a parent, and before we get to the end of this particular trail this week, I want to just ask Warren Kinsella, as a parent, have you ever been a helicopter parent? Did your parents ever helicopter you? And what do you make of the social science that now says, it might be an idea to encourage the child to get away from the computer, maybe even take the iPhone or other smartphone away for a couple of hours and let them play some road hockey.
Yeah, well, in Toronto, you can't toboggan because the city's decided kids can't toboggan on sea. Like, it's just insanity. This helicopter stuff. Like, let me give you let me tell you a story. My dad was a doctor, as you know, and my mom was an artist. And the story that both of them told me, so it must be true, is when I was a baby, she was giving me a bath once. And I know it's a horrible image, but bear with me. And she's giving me a bath, and apparently I took the little slither of soap as we were in Montreal, and I swallowed it. And so my mother ran in uh, to the next room where my father was carrying me, swaddled in a towel, and he was reading the paper, probably the Montreal Star at that point, and said, Douglas, Warren swallowed, a bar of soap. What should I do? And he didn't even look at her. Apparently, what he said was, turn him upside down and shake him, and he'll blow bubbles for you. so so yeah, that's kind of how I was brought up, and how a lot of us were brought up. And my kids, I worry about them. As soon as you become a parent, you worry about your kids basically until you die. And the last thing, if you asked any of my kids, what's your dad like? And I'll say the same thing. The last thing he always says to us when he's saying goodbye is, don't become a statistic. That's what I always say. Don't become a statistic. So I do want them to be careful. I want to stay out of places that are obviously dangerous and so on. But I do believe, because this is the way I was brought up, that skinning your knee periodically, or doing something a little bit dumb, it's just part of the education. That's how you learn how not to do things. It's like elections. I was saying to a young man the other day who was despairing of politics, I said, well, get involved in the campaign. And he said, what if it loses? I said, well, it's in the campaigns you lose where you learn something. You don't ever learn anything from winning. You learn from losing. The same thing with the skinned knee. Letting your kids go out there and experience the world and get bumped around a little bit, that ain't such a bad thing.
Well, on that note, Bubbles.
I'm going to regret telling you that story, aren't I?
No, you listen. The Americans are into this, but the Canadians more so. Virtually every Canadian has a nickname. I have not had a nickname for you for half a century, but you've given me a great gift today. Thank you for the gift. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your friendship. And thank you so much for the writing that you do, Warren Kinsella.
Thank you, sir. Bubbles signing out.
That's Bubbles.